Hi, everyone. I'm Geoff Palmer, CEO and founder of Clean Machine, plant-based fitness nutrition. Thank you for joining us. All replays can be seen on YouTube at Clean Machine Online. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you like it, and be sure to subscribe so you can catch more reviews like this one on this study, and of course, special guests as we move along. I want to give first a little shout out to Paula Franklin. If you're watching this, thank you for sharing this study with me. It's a really important study, and one I think has far-reaching ramifications, which we'll get into in just a moment. And on the surface, it can be one thing, but I think as we dig a little bit deeper into the details, it's going to unfold some more interesting facts and maybe even quite a large ramification when we summarize it all as a whole, including another study. Okay, but before we get started, the FDA disclaimer: this video is for informational and educational purposes only, and it is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. That would be against the FDA regulations. Okay, so let's jump right in here and pull up the PowerPoint. So this is a nutritional research review. We're going to review two different studies. The first study will be here on the screen. It's a 2013 study. Vegan men have less stiff arteries despite the lack of dietary DHA and EPA. Okay, so we know that dietary EPA and DHA can have effect on reducing some or creating some benefits. So I had this conversation. I had done an interview which suggested, hey, wait a minute, maybe vegans do not need to take preformed EPA and DHA. So what does preformed mean? It means it's preformed outside of the body, because our body can take ALA and form it into EPA and DHA, along with all 6 of the different forms of omega-3 fatty acids, as well as taking LA omega-6 and converting it into all 6 forms of the omega-3 fatty acids like DGLA, GLA, and arachidonic acid, as well as DPA. So those are your omega-6s. But we're going to focus on omega-3s for this particular thing. So the second study we're going to look at is this study here on the screen. Plant-based omega-3s may boost heart health and reduce heart disease. Now, the risk of heart disease, cardiovascular disease, which can include atherosclerosis, which is the hardening or the stiffening of the arteries. Now, this is important because that's how it ties into this first one, which is stiffening of the arteries, also called hardening of the arteries. Now, hardening of the arteries is when atherosclerotic plaques or lesions begin to form in the arteries. This makes them stiffer or less flexible. Our arteries need to expand or vasodilate and vasoconstrict, and it needs to go back and forth with that. If you get plaques building up on the inside of it, it makes it harder for it to expand and contract. Now, what this does is make it kind of stiff, or arterial stiffness. So that's what we're going to be talking about in this particular study, is arterial stiffness. What leads to it, what can help reduce that arterial stiffness, and how a diet and how nutritional interventions such as adding preformed EPA or DHA or changing the diet, how that affects arterial stiffness. Now, this is really important because cardiovascular disease, specifically atherosclerosis, can lead to hypertension, can lead to dementia, and potentially Alzheimer's, can lead to cardiovascular disease states like heart attack, cardiovascular disease, coronary heart disease. These are the big killers of human beings. Cardiovascular disease and atherosclerosis, the #1 killer of human beings on the planet. And so it's very serious concern. And this stiffening in the arteries is the very beginnings of that. Once the arteries become stiff, that's how we know we're potentially starting to form plaques, which is causing stiffening of the arteries. So let's jump into the first study. Okay, so this is the 2013 study. Vegan men have less stiff arteries despite the lack of dietary DHA and EPA. Now, this is important that they included the word dietary because we can consume ALA, which is commonly found in plants like chia and flax and uh, duckweed and lots of different things. Dark greens have it. Lots of plant foods, nuts and seeds have ALA. So it's pretty abundant in our food supply, and we can consume it in higher quantities in certain things, including obviously supplementing with ahi flour, the richest source of ALA and SDA of any plant on the planet. But you can get it from food too as well. Now, what they're saying here is dietary DHA and EPA, meaning in its preformed state. Now, all animals, uh, all herbivorous animals can take ALA and convert it down to DHA as well as EPA. Um, Carnivorous animals do not have this function. Fish and carnivorous animals actually consume EPA and DHA in their preformed state by eating either animals or the fish eat algae in the ocean when the algae has preformed EPA and DHA in it. So they get theirs directly. All herbivores, including human beings, get their ALA and can do the conversion process ourselves. Carnivores and fish cannot do that. Okay, so the big question then was, so when they're looking at the study, the objective here, it says the fish consumption, which is associated with higher intakes of DHA and EPA because it's naturally occurring in the fish because they're eating algae. Remember, fish do not make EPA and DHA. They eat algae, which contains the EPA and DHA. Now, other fish can eat those fish that ate the algae, and that's how the EPA and DHA get into the other fish. That's how that works. But fish don't make EPA and DHA. That's impossible. That's something that they just can't do. They actually have to consume it. All right. So when you consume fish, that is a preformed state, meaning the fish already formed it into EPA and DHA or got it from an EP or a source like algae. And then, so it's preformed outside of our bodies. We're not taking it and converting it and making our own EPA and DHA. So EPA and DHA both are non-essential fatty acids, whereas ALA is the only essential omega-3 fatty acid. That's the one we cannot make and that we have to get from food sources. The others we can actually make ourselves. So they're considered non-essential. Okay, so let's jump to the second set in the objective. We tested the hypothesis that vegans who eat no fish, and this is really important, or other sources of preformed EPA and DHA, which is supplementation. So they questionnaire and made sure all of the people in the study that were vegan did not eat fish. Obviously, you can't eat fish and be vegan, but also did not take EPA or DHA supplements. So they were getting no preformed EPA and DHA in this study. And the question they are testing is if they would have stiffer arteries in comparisons to omnivores. Now, the reason they wanted to know this is because when they looked in omnivores, those eating the standard Western diet or the standard American diet, when you give somebody who is an omnivore a little bit more preformed EPA and DHA, either as a supplement or by eating more fish or taking fish oil, when you do that, it tends to reduce the arterial stiffness. Well, that's a good thing, right? But is it? and we're gonna kind of tease that out in here. Yes, the EPA and DHA, the preformed EPA and DHA, did reduce that. But they said, well, wait a minute. If that's true, and vegans aren't taking any preformed EPA or DHA from fish or from supplements, well, then their arteries should actually be stiffer than omnivores, right? Wrong. Let's find out why. the method they used, which was very interesting. So when they first got the two groups to comparison, a bunch of vegans and a bunch of omnivores, they found that vegans had a lower BMI. Well, that would skew the results test because we know body mass index can influence the body's health level. So they evenly matched the age and the omnivore and the BMI, the body mass index. So same amount of body fat to ratio to height, and or body weight to height, and same age groups. So they were matched. 64 pairs were matched. This guy with this guy, omnivore with a vegan, same age, same BMI, same BMI. Okay, so now we have a true, fair control group to move forward with. And what did the research show? Well, the proportions of EPA and DHA in the plasma, this is really important, it's in the plasma, that's the blood, of vegans were only a third of omnivores. Now you can see the graph on here, and you can see the vegans, so 64 vegans compared to 64 omnivores, men. And the plasma EPA was 0.42 compared to 1.4. So omnivores had higher EPA, and the vegans also had lower DHA. Well, if the first study was right, that taking EPA and DHA lowered the arterial stiffness, and omnivores had a much higher EPA and DHA, 3 times as high DHA, then the omnivores, with all that extra DHA, should have better health of their stiffness of arteries. But that is counterintuitive. That would be counterintuitive because the results were so different. You can see the results underneath the graph. In conclusion, these results refute the hypothesis that arterial stiffness is increased by lack of fish oil, or other sources of preformed EPA and DHA in the vegan diet. Indeed, there was tentative evidence to suggest that arterial aging was actually slower in vegans. That means we had healthier arteries, veins and arteries. So this is really important that we saw DHA given to omnivores helped reduce their arterial stiffness, which is super important. But when vegans change the diet, when they're eating a plant-exclusive diet, the EPA and DHA levels were a third of that of omnivores, and they still had less arterial stiffness, meaning healthier arteries. So how could that be? Let's take a look at the next slide. Okay, so the big question then was, how could higher plasma DHA, which is omnivores given a DHA supplement or told to eat fish, how could higher plasma DHA reduce arterial stiffness in omnivores, yet 1/3 the amounts of DHA? Vegan men taking no DHA supplements at all, consuming no preformed EPA, either from supplements or from fish or any animal products at all, and their arterial stiffness was even less than omnivores. Boom. Something is a little peculiar about this, right? Okay, so let's dive into this next study. This next study is called The Effect of Omega-3. Let me go ahead and put it up on the, let's see. Actually, that's the wrong one. Okay, just read it right off the screen here. The effect of omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids on cardiovascular disease outcomes in patients with diabetes. Now, this was a meta-analysis, so it's looking at multiple studies. I'm not cherry-picking a single study just because it had favorable results that fit my bias. This is a meta-analysis, meaning looking at a lot of different studies and saying, what do all of the studies? And it was really important. They only included randomized controlled trials, or RCTs. These are considered the gold standard of studies. That means they were randomized so that you take one group and then you cross them over, so that you have a control group too, a third group. You have the two testing populations and a third group, or a control. This is the proper way to do truly good studies. And then you add on top of that, they took all randomized controlled studies and then made a meta-analysis looking at all the different randomized controlled studies and picked them out and then looked at the data. So this is the data that they found. Number one, and probably one of the more important points that they point out in this, in that first line, it has been shown that DHA increases LDL concentrations. Now, why on earth would you want to increase LDL when our body makes all the LDL it needs? You don't want DHA in the bloodstream because it can increase LDL in the bloodstream. That is not where you want it. You want it used for specific tissues, and you can push it into tissues where it belongs. Whereas EPA does the opposite. EPA actually lowers LDL cholesterol and increases the good HDL cholesterol. So how does that affect things? Well, when they looked into cardiovascular disease in patients with diabetes, they found that EPA alone significantly reduced the cardiovascular disease, but whereas the combination of EPA and DHA did not. So somehow you're getting a positive effect on cardiovascular disease, but as soon as you introduce DHA into the bloodstream, it takes away that positive effect of EPA on cardiovascular disease. So again, the body would not want DHA because it would inhibit or block or prevent the positive effects of EPA. Now, we know that ALA converts to EPA readily in the bloodstream. That makes sense because it can help reduce these risks of cardiovascular disease. But when vegans actually take ALA, the body actually reduces or kicks out that DHA, clears it from the bloodstream so that it's not interfering with the positive effects on EPA and ALA that plants can provide in the bloodstream. Now, this used to be believed that, hey, wait a minute, if ALA and EPA are not converting to DHA in the bloodstream, it's because we don't convert well. No, it's because the body doesn't want DHA in the bloodstream because it's increasing LDL cholesterol, and it's interfering with the benefits of EPA and ALA. So the body is clearing out DHA so it doesn't negatively impact the bloodstream, does not negatively impact cardiovascular disease. EPA and statins, when you combine them, improved endothelial function. Endothelium is the lining of the arteries. So that's what helps contract and expand the blood vessels, right? This is the endothelial. Endothelial health is how healthy your blood vessels are, which leads to cardiovascular disease. So EPA and statins improved endothelial dysfunction induced by oxidative stress. DHA did not. Once again, you can see DHA having a negative or a non-effect. Furthermore, unlike DHA, EPA can enhance the atherosclerotic protective function of HDL by inhibiting the HDL oxidation. DHA did not. It actually interfered and blocked this protective effect. So the body is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. If you consume ALA, it'll convert it to EPA, and ALA and EPA combined will give you health effects on your bloodstream. You do not want that ALA or EPA converting to DHA because it'll increase LDL cholesterol. It'll block the protective effects of EPA and ALA. It will reduce the effectiveness of antioxidant production and preventing the LDL and HDL cholesterol from it. You do not want high levels of DHA in the bloodstream. That's at least what this study is showing. And it's showing it in multiple different ways. that it is affecting LDL, it's affecting HDL, it's affecting oxidation, it's preventing the reduction of cardiovascular disease. The EPA alone did, but as soon as you add DHA, it wipes out the health benefits of EPA. This is why DHA is at the very bottom rung of the conversion ladder. ALA, SDA, ETA, then EPA, then DPA, then finally at the very bottom, DHA. It's because the body has set that up precisely in that way so that it can control DHA, because it could have a potentially negative effect on the bloodstream if it is converted in the blood, or with our diet introduced by supplementation or food. Your animal products, most of your meat, eggs, dairy, all can have DHA in them, preformed DHA. So when you're consuming them, you could be negatively affecting your bloodstream. The better approach is to consume only plants which have that precursor, ALA, and let the body convert it down. Now, what we see in vegans is that the body will take that ALA, convert it to EPA if it needs it for the bloodstream, and then actually store it in the tissues, and then convert it to DHA. They found 50 times as much DHA was being converted, biosynthesized inside tissues. And now, how did they get that information? Well, it's taken a really long time, because the only way you could do that is by biopsy. The reason they were doing blood studies is because obviously you can take somebody's blood out and it's no big deal. You can't take a chunk of their brain out. You just can't do that on a human being. But through all the new types of research, radioisotope trading, carbon isotope method, these new methods can test for actual conversion in the tissues. And they found that 50 times more DHA was being converted from ALA and EPA into DHA in the tissues than what was going on the blood. And there's a really good reason for that. All these reasons listed on the screen is the reasons why you don't want DHA in the bloodstream in high levels. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So to summarize this, DHA increases LDL, the bad cholesterol. EPA decreases LDL cholesterol and increases the good HDL cholesterol. EPA and statins improved endothelial dysfunction. DHA did not, and inhibited that positive effect. EPA can protect against atherosclerosis, the number one cause of disease death in the world. DHA did not. EPA can inhibit the oxidation of HDL. DHA did not in this study. So this is why the body would naturally want to reduce the amount of DHA in the bloodstream, which is exactly what we see in vegans. Let's go back to the original slide and you can see that. And here it is. There is the vegan men with their lower amounts of DHA, yet improved arterial function. The body is actually removing and eliminating the DHA, which could actually possibly be having a negative effect on that. Yes, if you take a severely negative person on an omnivore diet, eating crappy foods full of saturated fat, cholesterol, fried foods, all that kind of stuff, and then you give them some omega-3 EPA and DHA as a supplement, you're going to have some sort of actual small benefit, because it's reducing the oxidation of some of those things that you just ate. Okay, I get it. But you're taking a really unhealthy person and moving the needle a little bit. And that's what all these studies were showing, that EPA and DHA supplementation in their preformed state had a positive effect. Yes, in those that were really unhealthy and those eating a standard American meat-based diet. But when you looked at vegans, even with a much lower amounts of EPA and DHA conversion in the bloodstream, because you don't want DHA converting in the bloodstream, which would be better, is actually leading to less stiffness of the arteries. Improved arterial aging was slower. All right, let's get to the summary page. I think we're really starting to see a pattern here. Okay, so the original study, the effect of this, the meta-analysis, in conclusion, these results refute the hypothesis that arterial stiffness is increased by the lack of fish and other sources of EPA and DHA in the vegan diet. So let's address that first sentence right there. One, it's assuming that there is a lack of EPA and DHA, which is not true, because that EPA and DHA is just converting. EPA is converting in the bloodstream, but DHA is converting in the tissues. You don't need to eat it in its preformed state like you would find in animal products, in fish oil, or supplements. Next sentence. It may well be that the consequences of the lack of EPA and DHA are mitigated by other aspects of the vegan diet, i.e., more favorable lipid profile, lower BMI, and lower blood pressure. Okay, let's address the first part of that sentence. So the lack of EPA and DHA. All right, that's the misconception here, that somehow vegans, just because they're not consuming it in a preformed state, have a lack of EPA and DHA. I say there is no lack of EPA and DHA, because we're taking ALA and converting it in the tissues where we need it, when we need it, exactly how we do it. We have an endogenous system regulated by epigenetics, turning on and off genes that will produce the enzymes that trigger the conversion. Our body regulates this very carefully to make sure there's not too much DHA in the bloodstream, to make sure there's more EPA in the bloodstream for the heart and cardiovascular disease protection, make sure there's more DHA in tissues like the brain or the liver where it's needed most. This is where it should happen, but you won't measure that in the blood. It's not showing up there because the conversion rate is happening in the tissues. So this assumption that just because it's not happening in the blood doesn't happen anywhere else in the body is just not true. And we know that that's not true now with these new carbon isotope methods of tracing and of measurements. Okay. So the second part of this is that vegans have a more variable blood pressure. Well, that's a little bit. Oh, I don't want to use that chicken and egg analogy. Sorry. Okay, blood pressure comes from arterial stiffness. So it's the diet that's causing the arterial stiffness, which then leads to blood pressure. So if you have favorable blood pressure, of course, you're on a diet that's creating better. It's the same thing. So that's kind of silly. Yes, lower BMI. That's been proven across the board that vegans eating a whole food plant-based diet have lower BMI almost all the way across the board than those eating the standard American diet, or even those eating a healthier omnivorous diet, including animal products, which are high in saturated fat and cholesterol. And of course, because the vast majority of oxidized saturated fat and oxidized LDL cholesterol from our diet is coming from animals, there's hardly any cholesterol coming from plants. 99.9% of it's coming from animals. And then the saturated fat is almost entirely coming from it, because where's saturated fat found? In some nuts. You got peanuts, right? You've got avocados, you've got coconut. But generally, if you're eating coconut or avocados in the raw state, it's protected by antioxidants, so you're not getting oxidation of the saturated fatty acids, and they just don't show in many studies. You can measure avocados in their whole state, and they just don't show the saturated fat impact that cooked animal saturated fat has, because it's already been oxidized by the cooking. The heating of the saturated fat causes it to oxidize, which makes it fluffy and sticky, and this is when it can start to clog up the arteries. Okay, so my take is at the bottom here. I posit that there is no lack of EPA and DHA in the vegan diet as long as you're consuming sufficient amounts of ALA or SDA and SDA, either from dietary or from plant-based supplementation. Ahi flour, the richest source of omega-3 EPA, omega-3 ALA, SDA, and GLA omega-6 of any plant on the planet. So I always like giving people the best because we don't always eat right. We don't always eat consistently, and we don't always eat healthy. Great to make sure that you're consistently getting something that is super important. It's essential for our life in omega-3s. Cover your bases first. Then you don't have to worry so much as about diet, and you can eat good foods, stay healthy, and not have to worry about, am I really getting enough for the day? Okay. I think it's an inaccurate DHA measurement because they're basing that solely based on what they see in the blood. And as we see, you don't want DHA conversion happening at too high levels in the blood because it can induce potentially negative cardiometabolic and cardiovascular states. And two, the requirement to offset the negative impacts are lower in vegans because we're eating high antioxidant foods with polyphenols and phytonutrients and all these things that are rich and cardiovascular protective. They're actually helping nitric oxide, which helps us contract and expand our blood vessels. They're high in antioxidants, which prevents the oxidation of the lipids, the fats, and the cholesterol from oxidizing, and that's when they become sticky and form plaques. So you've got higher amounts of all these different things that prevent the disease in vegans. And then on the flip side, the dietary animal fat and cholesterol, when you cook them, which almost all animal products are cooked, you oxidize them. They're oxidative products, which is called oxidized LDL cholesterol, oxidized saturated fat. This is the big, fluffy, sticky stuff because it's like a Milky Way bar. You take chocolate, right? A flat chocolate, but you blow it up full of air and you got a Milky Way. It's real fluffed up. Well, that's the same that's happening. Well, not the same, but similar to what's happening in oxidizing animal cholesterol and animal saturated fat. It fluffs it up, makes it sticky, makes it globular, makes it adhere. The adhesion to the arterial inner linings it becomes a lot more dangerous and can build up over time, leading to arterial plaques, calcified plaques, and then heart attack, stroke, diabetes, contribution to diabetes, but also high blood pressure and senile dementia. When you cut off the oxygen and blood flow to the brain, you get dementia. When you cut it off to the genitals, you get erectile dysfunction. When you cut it off to the heart, you get a heart attack. When you cut it off to the brain, you can get stroke. So these are what happens. This is why the arterial stiffness is so important, and showing that, yes, the studies on EPA, DHA supplement, when you take them, did help a little bit because they're preventing some of the oxidation of the saturated fat and animal cholesterol from animals. So that is decreasing a little bit of that. That's why you see the positive effects of taking EPA and DHA. But when you look at the functionality of DHA itself, you can see right here that this is not what you want happening in the bloodstream. You don't want DHA increasing your LDL, your bad cholesterol. You don't want it interfering with the positive effects on EPA, on endothelial function, or in protecting against atherosclerosis, or inhibiting the oxidation. DHA can block and inhibit this. So, I would never take a supplemental DHA and throw it into our system, and our body is saying, wait a minute, I didn't make that. I didn't control for that. You're just tossing in stuff that I don't need or may not even want because it may negatively interfere with the positive effects that I'm trying to regulate. My body is trying to regulate by controlling. That's why we have a 6-step conversion process so that the body can turn on and off these spigots, right? Convert ALA to SDA, stop. Convert SDA to ETA and then to EPA, stop. Turn off that enzyme so we can pile up a little bit more EPA because we need it for the bloodstream. Don't convert it down to DHA until your body needs it in the specific tissues, for the specific reason, in the specific age group, in the specific health condition. All of these specifics, even the gender requirements are different. Women need a little bit higher DHA, and they actually do convert a little bit higher DHA than men do. We see that. That's been proven over and over in studies. There are gender-specific reasons. And then people just taking this preformed EPA and DHA and just dumping it into the system, the body says, wait a minute, I didn't make that. I don't need that. Stop. And that's what we're doing. We're jumping our body's naturally controlled and endogenously, internally regulated system that is so beautiful. It just gives us exactly what we need when we need it in the quantities we need it. By ingesting these preformed EPA and DHA from algae or from fish, we can actually be jumping the system and interfering with our own body's natural healing processes, potentially preventing the positive effects that our own body's production of EPA and ALA could have on preventing arterial stiffness, which could lead to atherosclerosis, the plaquing and the hardening of the arteries. So, when I first started out, all this was anti-vegan, that, oh, you can't get enough EPA and DHA from plants. And now we're seeing, no, the plants had it right all along. The plants are just providing the precursor state so our body can make that appropriate decision on when and where and how much EPA and DHA it needs for each specific tissues in each place, whether it's in the blood, it's in the heart, it needs more EPA, it needs more DHA in the brain, it needs a little bit of mix in the liver. All of these are carefully regulated changes that happen in the body, and our body regulates this process. That's why I hate when I see vegans out there buying into this fear that they take a blood test and say, oh, my blood levels are very low. Well, of course they are. That's exactly what your body wants it to be. Now, you can be getting not enough, and that's important that you consume enough of these essential fatty acids, which is, again, either eating lots of good sources of ALA and SDA or taking regularly a supplement like ahi flour, the richest source of ALA and SDA of any plant on the planet. Won the Nexty Award right there. The Nexty, the big N there. That is the top supplement award in the United States. So this is how you can help your body. Let your body do what it's designed to do. It's got this amazing, elaborate 6-step system that is controlled by epigenetics so that it can regulate and give itself exactly what it needs. Don't keep throwing stuff in there that doesn't belong there. Don't jump the system that the body has carefully designed to regulate its own amounts. I hope you enjoy this. If you do, please give it a share. I want to get this information out because I fear that people are caving to fears about misinformation from the omega-3 blood test, which I believe is absolutely wrong for vegans. Look, in a blood test, if you consume EPA, either and DHA from fish or from supplementation, of course, when you eat it, it's going to show up in your bloodstream. Well, of course it is. That's where it goes. So no surprise there. What the misunderstanding is that because vegans were having lower amounts, they assumed the conversion wasn't happening. And we now know that just simply is not true. 50 times more of ALA is converting to DHA in tissues so that it doesn't show up in the bloodstream, interfering with the own body's process to keep its cardiovascular system healthy. I want to get past these myths that vegans are not getting enough omega-3s or are not converting well enough. This is just not true based on the research that we have now. And as a matter of fact, the opposite is true, that we probably should not be consuming EPA and DHA in their preformed state, which is found in almost all animal products. And it could be another very clear indication that human beings are intended to be herbivores. Yes, an occasional amount of this coming in and occasionally doing it probably wouldn't be so much of a big issue because the body can clear these things pretty rapidly from the bloodstream, but consistently consuming animal products with this preformed EPA and DHA may actually be interfering, which is why we're seeing vegans actually have less arterial stiffness. Yes, there's lots of other contributing factors, the amount of antioxidants, no cholesterol in the diet, the amount of polyphenols. There's lots of things that be contributing, but this one is the one I'm trying to focus on. This is the information that I want to share with you, and I hope you share it with other people, because it really changes on a 360 level the assumptions that we used to think about vegans not getting enough, and now we know vegans actually had it right. The plants actually had it right, and actually consuming these EPA, DHA preformed supplements, either from algae or from fish oil, may not be the right approach, and may actually be making something good less good, or even possibly not good. And that's concerning to me. And that's why I share this information, because I want you to live the healthiest life possible. That's what I want for everybody. It's why I do what I do. It's why I formed Clean Machine, to try to get this information out and to offer the best of the best in options out there, so that you can be empowered with the information to make the best choices for your health, and you have the products to actually make that choices with. That's my goal for today. I hope you can share this information out there. Give it a thumbs up, give it a like. Please subscribe if you can. We're trying to build an audience, and every time you do like or subscribe or even comment, that helps get this viewed by more people. I think it's really important. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I want to share this information so it's empowering you to make the best decisions for your own health. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you join me each week, every Thursday at 4 o'clock. We'll have special guests. I'll be covering and reviewing some of the great research that is just unveiled, and some of the different projects that we've got, including our brand new impact bars, which are going out. Buy an impact bar, you can save a tree, you can feed a child, or even care for an animal just with each box of bars. Will save 12 trees. We'll plant 12 trees, save 12 animals, and feed 12 children. So beautiful give back. We do this out of love with our partnership with Food for Life Global, the largest give back charity for the plant-based movement, period. Thanks for watching. Good health, and we'll see